Yeah, well, there is this belief that extroverts are the best salespeople, and what the research shows is that extroverts are more likely to go into sales, extroverts are more likely to get promoted in sales jobs, extroverts are more likely to get hired in sales jobs. But when you actually look at the numbers, the correlation between extroversion and sales performance, that is, how often the cash register rings, is basically zero. And so Adam Grant at the University of Pennsylvania, just down the road from where we're talking right now, did some really interesting research on this. And what he did is he went to a software company and he measured using standard kind of assessments, the introversion, extroversion of a whole suite of software sellers, identifying them on a 1 to 7 scale. 1 meaning extremely introverted, 7 meaning extremely extroverted. And what he found is that the people who we think of as the very best, most natural salespeople, the 6s and the 7s, they're gregarious, glad-handing, backslapping, sociable, hey buddy, what can I do to put you in a Buick this afternoon kind of folks, they're not that great at sales. Now, it doesn't mean that the people at the 1s and 2s, the extremely introverted people, are very good at it. They're not very assertive, they're not comfortable striking up conversations. What Grant found was that the people who did the best were neither extroverts, as the myth goes, nor introverts, but were ambiverts. That is, people who are right in the middle. People who are a little bit extroverted, a little bit introverted. People who weren't the 1s and 2s, weren't the 6s and 7s, but were the 3s, the 4s, and the 5s. And those folks ended up being far more effective in sales, and we can speculate the reasons why. The extroverts come on too strong, they don't listen very well. The strong introverts don't assert enough, aren't sociable enough. But the people in the middle are much more tuned and much more calibrated. They know when to push, they know when to hold back. They know when to speak up, they know when to shut up. And so the myth of the extroverted salesman, which is what Adam Grant calls his paper, is exactly that, a myth. And the people who do it best are actually the ambiverts. The good news here, most of us are ambiverts. Most of us are not strong introverts or strong extroverts. Most of us are in the middle. Well, I mean, we tend to think, and it's interesting to see some surveys. Let me give you some survey research on this. There's an interesting study about creativity where it asked school superintendents and corporate executives, what's the most important creative skill today? What's the most important creative skill today? The school superintendents uniformly said problem solving. They ranked problem solving as the #1 most important skill. The business executives ranked problem solving much lower. Their #1 skill that they ranked was problem identification. And here's what I think is going on. Today, if people know precisely what their problem is, if I know precisely what my problem is, I can probably find the solution on my own. This is true whether I'm might want consulting services or design or sales or anything like that. If I can know precisely what my problem is, there's enough information out there that I can harvest to come up with a solution on my own. So enlisting someone else to help me isn't that valuable. Where I need help, where people are extraordinarily valuable, is if I don't know what my problem is, or I'm wrong about my problem. So the real value is in people who can identify new problems, who can come to a client, a customer, prospect, and say, here's a problem you don't realize that you have. Here's something you need that you don't realize that you need. Here is a latent demand. Here is some latent needs. Here's a problem you're going to face down the road. And so the premium, I think, has shifted from problem solving as a skill to problem finding. And the social science on problem finding says that it is an integral artistic skill, that artists of all varieties are very good problem finders. Artists also, by their nature, give the world something it didn't know it was missing. That's what artists do. They're creating something entirely new. They're identifying a new problem to solve. And so this move from problem solving to problem finding, I think, is at the center of the creative economy. There's some huge changes in the relationship between buyers and sellers that has changed, to my mind, selling fundamentally over the last 10 years. Most of what we know about sales comes from a world of information asymmetry, where the seller always had more information than the buyer. When the seller has more information than the seller can rip you off. This is why we have the principle of buyer beware. Buyers have to beware if sellers know a lot more. Buyers don't have many choices, and buyers can't talk back. They're at a big disadvantage, and so the whole principle of caveat emptor, buyer beware, comes from a world where sellers had a huge information advantage. That's not so true anymore. The best example I have are cars. 20 years ago, you went in to buy a Nissan, the Nissan dealer knew a lot more about cars and about Nissans than you ever could. Today, not so much. Today, arguably, you can know more about cars, more about Nissans than that car dealer does. You can go in knowing the going rate in your area. You can go in knowing the ins and outs of the particular make or model. You can go in actually with the factory invoice price knowing what they paid for the car. And so a world that has gone from information asymmetry to something at least close to information parity, seller beware is still good advice. I mean, buyer beware is still good advice. But you're really in a world of seller beware. When buyers have lots of choices, lots of information, and a way to talk back, the sellers are on notice. And seller beware is a very different world, different in kind, not different in degree. And seller beware forces people much more to the high road. In a certain mood, I'll say, get over it. In a more charitable mood, I would say, I understand where you're coming from, but recognize that sales is not what it used to be. That is, we have these associations with sales that you have to be sleazy and slick, but this is not true. I mean, you don't have to be extroverted and gregarious. You have to be a good listener. You don't have to be forceful. You need to be able to assert, but you have to be able to know when to hold back. You're not trying to stick people with something that they don't want. You're trying actually to make their lives better. And so I think what we need to do is untangle these very old-fashioned negative associations with sales and recognize that sales is something that we all do every single day. And the way to get better at it now is to do it more like a human being. The other thing is that if you are an artist or a creator, I think you have an obligation to sell. If you actually care about what you're creating, I just don't think that it's right, in a moral sense, for you to simply say, I'm in a different category from everybody else, so if I just create something, the world will find it. I think if you have something that is so valuable to people, you have to go out and tell people about it. And if you believe in something very deeply, that's a form of advocacy for yourself, for your ideas, for your art, that is, I think, an integral part of being an artist. The old ABCs will always be closing. The new ABCs are A, attunement, B, buoyancy, C, clarity. Attunement, A, attunement, understanding people's perspective, seeing the world through their point of view. B, buoyancy. Anybody in sales, anybody in the arts faces rejection all the time. So buoyancy is, what does the social science tell us about how to remain afloat on this ocean of rejection? C, clarity. It's what we were talking about before. Moving from problem solving to problem finding, moving from accessing information to curating information. The most important thing that the business community to take away from this is that we're all in sales now, but sales isn't what it used to be. And so each one of us is in some form of sales. We're persuading, influencing, convincing other people. But the way to do it better isn't to be more sleazy. In fact, that's bad tactical advice. The way to if we're all in sales now, but sales isn't what it used to be, the way to do it better is to do it in a more human way. To listen better, to understand people's interests more, to make things clear, and to actually turn sales into a form of service. Essentially to serve first and sell later. And I think there's a great kind of affinity that's going on right now between these humanistic principles and what's effective. And that offers, I think, a very different approach to business that can be more fulfilling for individuals and more valuable for the economy. Oh, there are all kinds of exercises to get better at this. I mean, I think that one of the things that any company could do is get its people better at listening. Listening has always been valuable in any form of sales or persuasion. It's doubly, triply valuable today because so much of it depends not on forcing people into doing things or in accessing information, but in understanding people. So I think there's a huge opportunity out there for organizations of all kinds to engage people in ways to listen better. So that's one thing that I think works extraordinarily well. The other thing is I think we need to equip people to deal with rejection a little bit better. Entrepreneurs, artists, all of us, we face rejection all the time. It's part of the nature of work today. Most of us aren't equipped to do that, and there's some really great lessons in how to change people's explanatory style. So when they face rejection or failure, they explain things in a way that aren't personal, that don't say it happens all the time, and that don't consider it permanent. And so helping people change their explanatory style is another tactic that can work very, very well. There are all kinds of great things, and they're not that hard, they're not that expensive, and they all draw on very fundamentally human values.